germ of this event came from, actually it came from the sinking of the SS Ventnor in 1902, which is, quite a long time ago. I'm sure that most of you know that there were on board 499 of our kōiwi, our Chinese ancestors on that ship, and another 13 crew members and Chinese passengers who lost their lives on that day. Of course, it was those kōiwi were being returned to our ancestral homes in China, and of course, when those people were lost, it was like a really, really monumentally devastating experience for our community in lots of ways. But as they say, good luck follows bad. And as Lu Xiong likes to say, our good luck came from the fact that Ventnor sank 10 kilometres off the Hokianga harbour, and the kōiwi that came up came to be cared for by the people of the north. Mātihetihe Marae, Colleen, and also the people on the south side of the harbour, Te Roroa. And, and this started the germ of a very meaningful and long relationship that has passed down through the years, but in particular since 2007 when Lu Xiong went up, and Lu Xiong's over there, Wang Lu Xiong, went up and made those first relationships with people like Alex Nathan and Snow Tane from Te Roroa, and then Uncle Mingo, late Uncle Mingo at Mātihetihe Marae in Mitimiti. And, and since then, Colleen and I have been working together, I don't know, in the mid-2017s. We were actually just talking about how there'd be times when we'd be emailing every week for various things. But, all of these things, and now today, most recently, last year, the New Zealand Chinese Association took up a group of young people to the Hokianga, to Mātihetihe Marae, to Te Roroa, to continue making those relationships, to continue building. And I think that is the actual real heart of this kaupapa, is the relationships we build. And I think for Chinese, Tangata Tiriti, an exploration of the ideas and ways that we can relate, the ways that we can be responsible Tangata Tiriti, the way that we can be, the way that we can think about positioning ourselves as New Zealanders and our place here. All these are very deep things, and this all is sparked from the Ventnor, and in particular, thinking about and talking about and envisioning ways in which we can build the world we want with the people of like mind. So that was a long way of saying hi. I'm now very happy to introduce Colleen to you, Leo and I.
Ni hao, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Ko waio, ko Tarakiha te maunga, ko Hokianga te moana, ko te Rarawa te iwi, ko Tāmaui te hapu, ko Mātihetihe Marae. Ko Colleen Leo and I taku ingoa. Kia ora whānau, as my sister here said, served as chair of Mātihetihe Marae Trust for 6 years. The bulk of that was actually also through the COVID-19 pandemic. So through that time, we had a lot of projects on the go. And when I came on as chair, one of the first ones that I had to pick up was the Ventnor kaupapa. So that particular portfolio sits under the responsibility of the chair. When our whānau back home shared the meaning of the kaupapa, it came down to two things really. One was to honour our kōiwi that are buried back at our urupā, and to always maintain that relationship with our Chinese Hainamana community and whānau. And we've been able to achieve that. When I have a look at just this week, I was in a presentation with Professor Kylie Quince, who is our Dean of Law at AUT, and she mentioned we've moved away from cultural competency and we're now in the space of cultural humility. And so what that means is for those as Tangata Tiriti, what do you bring to these relationships and to the table that we share together under Tiriti o Waitangi? You know, your values that you bring, your cultures that you bring, and how do we sit down and work through that together? And when she was sharing this kōrero, I was sitting there and just everything was popping off, and I was thinking about our relationship. The one that we share, brought together, yes, through tragedy, but now we've been able to see it flourish because we've got our rangatahi that are leading it through. So I think it was about 6 years ago, Kirsten and I on the mahi, because we were voluntold by all our aunties and uncles, this is what you fellas are doing, and then they looked at us. So Kirsten, she had all her whānau and that sorted on that side. I had mine sorted, and being voluntold, we were sitting there going, you know what? Rangatahi. They're the ones that actually have to bring it through. So we kind of in that space, we then started working on like our rangatahi strategy. So now I'm pleased to announce that our new chair is Kaila Kamiera Campbell, rangatahi to the max, proudly born and raised back home, living in Whangarei now. I think what happened there, she has been engaged with the kaupapa that was held last year as well, and we were able to gently hand over a big part of our mahi that we were kind of supporting in the background. So really great, you know, to see so many rangatahi here today, to be voluntold actually by Etienne and Era what we were going to be doing today instead of us having to tell people, to be told this is what time you have to be here and this is what we want the kōrero about. But when I go back and have a look at that cultural humility, you're breathing life into what that looks like as tangata tiriti. So even when we've had the relationships back home, I remember Lu Shen coming through. Miti, we're remote. So we're out on the west coast, and when we say, oh, you need to come to our marae to kōrero about that kaupapa, you know, we're talking, if you're coming from Auckland, that's about a 5-hour drive, 174 people live in our community, and we're right out on the water. You're going to get stuck in Pangaru if we've got high tides and floods and that, and you're not moving until it goes low tide. So that's kind of how remote. She's laughing because she knows. That's how remote we are. And so when that commitment started right back there, when those first discussions were happening about how we were going to strengthen our relationship to each other, but also how we were going to honour the loved ones that were buried in our urupa. And then from there, we've just had lots of kaupapa that have come out of it as well, and lots of special moments where we've actually learnt more about that we have more in common with each other than we actually have differences. That we've been able to learn about each other's most sacred ceremonies and that. We were able to put those in practice when you've come back home on your tours and that, and your haerenga, and we've been able to have that shared learning together. I think what's been really poignant though, so if you have a look, that is our wahurua. Kind of a funny story with that. So the uncles put it up. Now the miti uncles, you know, they do things their way. So they were kind of given guidance, I think by Papa Meng and some others, about maybe where we have to locate it to ensure that it is respectful to our Chinese families, Chinese communities as well. The uncles kind of forgot that kōrero, and they just kind of guessed it out to where they thought the most appropriate place was going to be. And then I remember when Papa Meng, everyone else came through, they were moved because it was exactly where it was meant to be placed. When you have a look at it, you can't quite see it in the photo, but that does overlook our moana as well. And so it's about that story of keeping us connected and together, but actually also stands there as a monument so that we can always remember our love for each other, our love for those, the kōiwi that are buried in our urupa, but also about maintaining of relationships. So the rangatahi that are coming through now to pick up and drive this mahi forward for us, our tamariki that are working with our, emerging artists and that live back home, it is that mokopuna kōrero at the moment. And it is for you to drive forward and for us to take a back seat and actually just to support the kaupapa moving forward because it is going to live on through all of you.
E tū au ki te pakumehi kia koutou ki ngā manawhenua Ngāti Whatua. I tupu ake au I raro I te maunga keke, I kaihoio I rere awa o Waitemata me te Tāmaki awa, nōku te Waimari e ki te hononga kanohi, ki te kanohi kia koutou, kia ora. Tuarua, e mihana kia koutou, a tinana, a wairua, me ngā rorohiko hoki, tēnei te mihi. Kia ora. I have about, ka huri au ki te reo ingarehi, inaine, ki taku ringatoi kōrero. I have about 20 photographs, and I'm just gonna, it's a very casual thing, so I'm gonna sit down in the spin bag. Feel free to relax, get a drink. I wrote something and I put it in my email draft, so I'll read that out first to start us off. When there is a history involved, the work is no longer about me. It's about the ancestors and the community that gather for this living history. We gather here for the Ventnor story and for the curiosity of being Tangata Tiriti. I recently made a connection with my mother tongue and te reo, and it was the sense of time. So the Chinese word for mokopuna, descendant, is hoda, the generation behind. And the word for ancestor is zuxian, and that's the generation in front. It's a bit counterintuitive to have the future generation behind and the ancestors in front. And it reminds me of the whakatauki, kamua kamuri. It was one of the first ones I learnt when I encountered te ao Māori, walking backwards into the future. And I think it shows our shared values of Chinese and Māori in a way we respect our elders and also te take o te mokopuna, ko wainga mokopuna. That's the title of this project. And as Colleen and Kirsten were saying, it's like kapu te ruha, kahau te rangatahi, tika? Yeah, it makes me think of that whakatauki. This is Kirsten and I doing our baisan at Mitimiti, and that was my first time. The Pāruru trip was the first time I was on a welcomed on a marae and experienced the manaakitanga through pōwhiri, through mihi ki te ringawera, and I was really just moved by that experience and felt connected to Manawhenua through a rangatiratanga relationship and not just through the crown and like te tiriti, because sometimes that's quite foreign. I'm like, I don't understand that. It's something we learned in history but never experienced. And that's us on the beach. But this trip was what inspired this whole project, and I think the fruits of it, I was cutting celery earlier and I started tearing up because I'm like, when I was learning English when I was little, I was so shy to speak and I couldn't imagine myself doing this today. So I'm really proud to be doing that. But the exhibition, the first piece is Rimurapa, and I wanted to connect the tides of Te Taitonga o Haina, south of China, to the tides of the kōiwi that washed up, and that's the entrance of it. And Ida said it smelled like dog shit. But I wanted that significance because that it's a sea story, and that if it happened anywhere else in the world, it would have been a different story. And Ida's waiata was a huge inspiration for this whole exhibition because the line at the bottom, second to last line, koinei ngā moenga o ngā tūpuna. This is the urupa of these Chinese kōiwi that are in the moana, and that's wāhi tapu. That's not going to be touched. It's going to be there forever. So I wanted it to be blue and cyanotypes because I was coming out of photography degree, and I made this by lying about 20 rocks, giant rocks on Omapere Beach, which is where one of the lifeboats washed up. And I wanted to have my hands in the work to show the amount of labor that these ancestors had worked for when they came here through gold mining and physical labor, because that's what a lot of migrants can only do when they come to a country where it's not their language. They use their hands. That's my appearance as well. They use massage as their form of mahi because communication in English is a challenge for them. And then we could look to Reva and I's piece. This is kōrero paper, and I wanted to show a little bit of process. She built a bathtub. No motu karaka ia me te Rarawa, and she's been in the Hokianga for, I think, over 10 or 15 years and has been making kōrero paper, and this is us boiling it in the bathtub. And it's the whole dough. It gets boiled for 10 to 12 hours overnight, and it's a really good fertilizer for your garden. And then the pulp goes in I call it the smoothie machine because I can't remember the name of it. And slide. And then this is the big swimming pool she built, and we put the frame in the swimming pool of pulp, lifted it up, and then it dries and peels off, and I did a cyanotype of my body in it and hung up. This is the workshop that I did at Mātihetihe, Te Kura o Mātihetihe, and my hoa at Te Kura Kaupapa o ngā Mokopuna ki te motu kairangi was the first person to deliver a cyanotype workshop i te reo Māori, and I was like, awhina mai, because I want to do this workshop with the kids at Miti Miti too. So they explained some of the pūtaiao, the science elements of like the hihi kati kati, the UV rays that changes when tamanui te rā shines, and then panoni te tai, the colour changes. And my reo at the time still is very little, and I delivered most of it in reo Māori, but I was mostly silent the whole time and just gave tohu tohu. But they were really excited when it washed out, and then I taught them how to make the Chinese mukanot, which I'll do a bit of more explanation on the koha I gave towards the end. This one's one of my favorite pieces I made for the exhibition. I called it Dive, changed the name from the pamphlet, but I told the kids at the kura, kaua e neke, e takato i runga i tēnei papa, and you can tell it's them because they were moving. Like, it was the 4 blurry figures, and I was the one that actually stayed still because you can see my hands. But it's a giant sheet of silk, and we all got sunburn in the sun for like under 10 minutes because it was a very hot day, and then rinsed it out. And there's heaps of bamboo in Hokianga that's like about this big. And I felt really, I knew I wanted bamboo in the exhibition because my ancestors definitely wove with it. My grandmother wove, on the maternal side, wove with split bamboo to make bed sheets, and they would keep you cool in the summer, because the air just like comes off. And I grew up sleeping on those. So it's a future material development that I'm really excited for. Then we pan to Ange's work. She made Cody steeped plaster in mutton cloth, out of cotton, and pulled out individual strands, and that's what makes the color of it. And she says it's a healing material that she's made that's almost like a broken kōrero because of her whāngai identity into a different family as Māori, and that was her connection to it. And I was really grateful to have her in the exhibition. And that's a photo of us. This is what's exciting me at the moment. How Rarawa can be a through line for tikanga Māori, being Tangata Tiriti and connecting back to the roots of our motherland. I think the Ventnor story was a through line in the beginning. And the Reo one is also, and I'm most interested in Rarawa right now because it's fun, and it's impossible to learn Rarawa without learning the reo and the story behind each plant and the hauhake and the tikanga of like, why do you not do it when you're hapu or on your ikura, and when it's raining. So, yeah. Now back to the muka knot. That was my grandmother always carried these muka knots for good luck on her keychains, and around the house. She'd hang it on the walls, and also around Chinese New Year. And I was like, what could be a good connection with Chinese and Māori? A Chinese knot made out of muka, a fiber that all Māori know what it is because it's muka. It's beautiful. And the Kōrero wood that connects Waipoa and the significance of it to Te Rarawa as well. And also, I think Trish is on the live stream. Oh, she's probably listening, but she let me harvest from her tākiriko of like 10 years old, and I counted about 400 ro from that muka knot, and she helped me strip some of it, and I think I spent a week just taking off the para from it. So very grateful to your generosity in sharing your plant and the knowledge for this. Ko hātu Ngāti Whatua. That was my explanation. And I wanted to finish my kōrero of where my ukaipo is. This is me and my mum in a place, this is where I'm from, Guangzhou, not Guangzhou. Everyone always gets confused, but it's 500 kilometers north from Hong Kong, Shenzhen area, and the tower in the back is called Yigutai, and it's a tower that's 1,200 years old, and it's like the meeting place for that town, and it's a bit like, let's meet at 277, everyone knows where that is. Because I went to Epsom. Oh, yeah. That's a terrible way to end the story, isn't it? But yeah, that's my artist kōrero.
Kia ora te whānau. Daigaho, ko Nathan Joe Tokuingawa. My name's Nathan. I whakapapa back to the Guangdong region of China on both sides of my family. I was born and raised in Ototahi and have spent like most of my adult years in Tāmaki Makaurau. I'm predominantly a playwright and performance poet. I'm here to facilitate the panel. I am in no way an expert or academic when it comes to the topic of te tiriti or being Tangata Tiriti. I'm still learning and discovering what it means to be Chinese kōiwi myself. You know, it's still a relatively like new part of my identity and journey, something I'm excavating slowly. But I think I'm here today probably because I met Ji Ying through a sort of community artistic mentorship program as one of their mentors, and have sort of like followed them closely. And I'm very in awe of what Ji Ying and many other artists of sort of, I guess, the next generation are doing, and entangling their own identities with bigger questions, much bigger questions than I ever did. And I feel very privileged to be here with these three amazing speakers to my left, who I will get to introduce themselves, because we want to try to like break down some of the formalities that I think are sometimes associated with panel discussions. It's a very like loaded framework and a loaded event, and it can become very serious very quickly. And I think this is a serious topic, but one that we are still excavating and navigating in really the early days of this understanding of ourselves and our situation in Aotearoa. So yeah, I'll pass to my left.
I think they were into that assimilationist kind of mentality and tried to settle in, and so adopted Thai and Khmer names once they had moved. I also don't know a lot about my grandparents' generation and generations before them, because on my father's side, they got caught up in the Cambodian genocide, or the killing fields. And that was sort of our point of entry into Aotearoa. My father arrived here as a refugee in 1984, exactly 41 years ago next week. And yeah, just very quickly, the Cambodian genocide, or the killing fields, was orchestrated by the Khmer Rouge, or the Red Cambodians, or the Communist Party of Cambodia at the time. And they basically emptied the entire country and forced people into agricultural, communal, egalitarian labor camps, where people were forced to work on end, for hours on end with little to eat and all of that sort of stuff. They also, were deeply suspicious of the other, particularly the ethnic other, so people like the Chinese, my ancestors. And within 4 to 5 years of Khmer Rouge rule, they murdered around 2 million people. But yeah, fortunately, Dad came out to Aotearoa as a refugee in 1984, and then I was born here in Tāmaki, Makarau in 1991. And it's really great to see my former law professor, Professor David Williams, here, but also to see earlier Professor Manying Ip and Grace Wong, people who, well, in the case of David anyway, someone who ignited my interest in Te Tiriti, I have to say, through his Law 121 class, and people like Manying and Grace, who really paved the way for young Asian scholars. So it's really great to see you all here. And yeah, my day job is I'm a lecturer at AUT in Te Kura Mātauranga, the School of Education. And prior to that, I was based at Waipapa Taumatoro, the University of Auckland, for 10 years, where I taught in Te Punawānanga, the School of Māori and Indigenous Education, and my supervisor was Te Kauhau Hoskins. So that's a little bit about me.
Thanks, Lincoln. Yeah, I'll get you to jump in next, Ida.
Kia ora, Lincoln. Tēnā tātou te whare. Kōwaio I tū mai oku mātua mai te whenua o Haina ki Tāmaki Herenga waka me te koingo ka kitea tētahi rākau tūperepere hei taunga Makarau. E ruia taku kākano ki te whenua o Tāmaki kei te raki pai whenua no te mana whenua o Ngāti Whātua, no reira re ana ngā mihi ki a koutou. Ko Pupuke te wai e kauria tuatahi tia e au. I tapaina tōku iwi haina au ko te tamaiti o Tuarangi. So ko Tong Ziu I taku reo take take. Aneira a iratang e tu atu nei, e mihi atu nei ki a koutou. Kia ora, my name's Iratang. So as I just said before, my name Tongziu means a child from far away. I was the first person in my family to be born in Aotearoa, kind of by accident. So, as far as I know. And I was raised on Te Raki Pai Whenua on the North Shore. Now, if you know anything about growing up on the North Shore, you grow up thinking that you're Pākehā. And I didn't realize that I wasn't Chinese until I was getting my hair cut done by a lady, and she's like, "Where are you from?" And I was like, "I'm from here." And my mom's like, "No, she's not."
Oh my God.
So I'm still unlearning a lot of things, but it wasn't really until I went to university at Waipapa Taumataro that I even had an awareness of who a Manawhenua was. And there, I think a really life-changing thing, well, not life-changing, but it really kind of changed my thinking, is actually a Pākehā friend who actually pronounced takapuna correctly. And she just did it, no big deal, but I've grown up going to Rangitoto College. No reira, I think it's that turning of your whakaaro to actually just be, just honour what is from this land, and just because it's uncool at school, you know, we grow up with a lot of assumptions of what neutrality is. So I'm on this decolonisation journey, learning te reo Māori. I'm also learning about my own haina manatanga, haina mana, I've heard that recently, I think it's Tiana. We're reclaiming that, some of us reclaiming that word that sometimes sounds like a slur, haina mana, Chinaman, often used to, yeah, pit Chinese communities against other communities. But yeah, so, yeah, koe, tēnā.
Seda. So now it's your turn to do the thing you've avoided, Etienne.
So, yeah, no Marea, no Haina, no Kotirana, no Ingarani o Kutupuna. He Haina mana ahau, he Pākehā ahau hoki, he Tangata Tiriti ahau. So, I'm from all over the place, and it's really lovely to be here in this place with everyone. People that we've met on Paruru, people that we've just met today, people that we've met from a series of wānanga that Jiang and I went to. Kia ora, tāwera. Lovely to see you there. And it's just so exciting to be here. I felt this way at the opening of Jiang's exhibition in Whangare, and now here today as well. What a special thing it is for all of us from different backgrounds and walks of life, but also connected by a common kaupapa, to be here together to, one might say, noho tahi. For the people who have seen this in the foyer, and people online, I think a link will be coming to you from Ati Bev. But it's been a big 2 weeks, between this kaupapa and also launching this book, which actually these two and Jiang and many others were part of as well, about Māori-Chinese relationships and solidarities and what it means to be haina mana ki Aotearoa today. And I really feel like this kaupapa is a continuation on from that as well. And this book, which you really should get, the Ventnor is kind of strewn through it. It's what brings us here today. And I hope it's something that can keep bringing us together, us as Chinese and Māori, and just as a really good story. This is launching into, Nathan's going to hate me for this because he had some questions and things, but I just, I want to speak my truth today. And that is the power of a specific story, even amidst all of the general ones. I learned about Te Tiriti as in law school as well, also Laws 121, but at Te Herenga Waka, Victoria. And Well, yeah, for one thing, it's kind of embarrassing that the best introduction to Te Tiriti I had so far was at law school, when we had lots of chances to learn about it in primary school and high school. And I look back now and I see we actually did learn some, but I've been assured that the kids today are just, yeah, Te Tiriti is being normalized to them, and they are being normalized to Te Tiriti from a much younger age. And so maybe in the future we won't need panels like these grappling about these deep questions of identity, because the next generation will already have it figured out. And so they can move on to other things like building the society that we would love to see for future generations. But we're here in the present, and we are all, children of the identity struggle. And that's, I imagine it is for me, part of what drew us to both Te Tiriti and the Ventnor story. But long story short, Te Tiriti is, well, it can be talked about as some sort of like very general thing, something that could be talked about in terms of a bunch of different principles, topical, or depending on which historical account you follow. And also there are very specific stories of Te Tiriti in different rohe. I live in Puneke, Wellington, and the date on which Ngāti Toa and Te Atiawa and Ngāti Raukawa, all down there, signed Te Tiriti was not the, 6th, 7th of February. It was a few weeks later. Waitangi is a long way from Wellington, and actually so is Hokianga. What I'm trying to say here, though, is for me, going to Hokianga and learning about the Ventnor story, that was a real in for me. That was a specific context that I could resonate with and see myself as part of, and then understand the idea behind Te Tiriti because of the more specific relationship rooted in place, in whenua, and in relationship. Was I just meant to introduce myself?
Yeah. No, that's great. It actually perfectly kind of opens up my next question, which is, we had a kind of pre-panel hui the other night, and one of the things we were discussing is what is this panel actually about? Because yes, it is about the SS Ventnor. It is also about being Tangata Tiriti, but these are very like expansive, very broad things. So really, I was curious about like personally for you, each of the panelists, what are the resonances? What are the burning things they want to say about these topics? And what are the through lines amongst all this quite nebulous stuff that we can kind of hook into? So yeah, I'd love to hear, and Etienne, you've sort of discussed this, but what your sort of starting point of one hearing about the Ventnor was, because I think that is such a pivotal moment and can be such a minor but significant moment, as well as why you think it's kind of taken a hold of both your cultural imagination and heart, as well as why do you think it's so important? Yeah. Who would like to go first? Maybe you, Lincoln? Etienne's sort of said his part around that, kind of.
Yeah. Well, I want to acknowledge Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei here today, because back in 2020, Ngāti Whātua organised a noho marae for a group of refugee and migrant rangatahi, and it was facilitated by Hana Maihi. And that was sort of the starting point for me in terms of thinking about Asian Māori relationships. We were encouraged to think about this long history of Asian Māori relationships. And that sort of laid the foundation, I guess, for my PhD thesis, which was looking at Asian relationships with Te Tiriti o Waitangi. So that sort of, I guess, planted the seed for me in terms of thinking about Asian Māori relationships more broadly. But in terms of the Ventnor, I guess two events kind of brought the Ventnor in view for me. One was working on my PhD at the time and trying to write my literature review and trying to look for literature around early Māori, Chinese, Māori, Asian relationships. And I, of course, came across Auntie Kirsten's school journal, piece, which was called The Story of the Ventnor. So that was, I guess, one point of entry into the Ventnor story. The other, almost simultaneously, was that in 2021, the Asian New Zealand Foundation had organised a Otago Chinese New Zealand history hui. And so we went down to Dunedin, Lawrence, and Queenstown, Arrowtown, for a 3-day kind of heading around learning about the history. So that was my sort of point of entry into that story.
Thanks, Lincoln.
I've always wondered, not always, but in the beginning when I first came across the Ventnor story, which I think wasn't fully conscious in my mind until I heard about the Paruru trip. I'd heard about it. I was like, okay, cool, ship thing, which I think can come across when you first hear about this Ventnor. You're like, okay, like that's pretty arbitrary to us as a Chinese culture, right? But as someone who isn't descendant of the Ventnor whānau, I'm really compelled by the story because one of our kuia, Esther Fung, said that this story about early Chinese experiences are part of our collective identity, even if we don't have whakapapa to them. So for context, my parents came, so there's significant waves of Chinese migration. They came post-75. So a lot of post-75 Chinese migrants come from the mainland, and a lot of earlier people would have come from Canton, Guangdong, south of China, which happens to be where I come from as well. And there possibly is a struggle to relate from the mainland experience to those early Chinese experiences. For me, I'm kind of like in the middle because I am Cantonese, but I don't have any kind of ancestral connection to these early Chinese New Zealand history stories. However, they are the stories that have allowed me to exist in Aotearoa in the way I am right now. If it weren't for them in the way that they, the Chinese were the most kind of racially legislated ethnic group outside of Māori in Aotearoa. Look it up, there's like 20-something of them. They went through that and they fought for a place. I think, possibly, I think it's because we look different as well. Being one of the first tauiwi who don't look Pākehā, I think there's a really easy way for discrimination to happen there. So, yeah, I think the story is for all of us, I think, to connect to. Yeah.
I'd love to add to that.
Please. Thank you.
For two reasons. One is because the first time I heard about the Ventnor story was through Auntie Esther's son, Dr. Christopher Fung, who I think is watching on the live stream from the US. So hi, remember that coffee we had years ago? It planted seeds. You're onto something. The other thing is when the Ventnor story became really real for me, though, and not just a textbook thing or oh, that's a cool story. As Ida mentioned as well, I'm not a Ventnor descendant. I'm not even Cantonese, and so not sure why they've got me up here. No, but that's kind of part of it, where Lincoln was on the organising group for Paruru, this trip to Hokianga for young Chinese New Zealanders. And we also heard about it from Uncle Gordon Wu, who was doing a talk in Wellington Central Library about old Chinese history, and then mentioned, if anyone wants to come along on this trip, and he didn't give very many details, but I thought, I'm there, Uncle Gordon, take me with you. And so luckily it came to be that I ended up on Paruru as well. But like Ida, not a descendant, also not a descendant to my knowledge, Lincoln. Wondering what the place of all of us non-descendants could be in this story. And as Ida has said, we had encouragements from everyone involved that we really want more people to be involved with the story and to have a relationship with it. But as someone whose belonging has always been marginal in Aotearoa, you kind of look a gift horse in the mouth, and you're kind of like looking for like, oh, but how far's too far? Don't want to step on any toes here. Want to make sure people know whose story this is, etc. And it took Uncle Murray, Uncle Gordon's son, standing with us at Hione Urupa, the cemetery at Mātihetihe Marae Miti, where that beautiful red gate is. Uncle Murray standing just in front of that gate and saying, look at this monument that has been built. We need people to come each year and sweep the graves. We need people to come and pay their respects. And as many people have said, Miti is a long way away. So also just logistically and practically, please be part of this story and help us to take care and take some of the responsibility for it. So at that point, I think it became more real for me. I still would say that, you know, my relationship to the Ventnor story is that of a non-descendant, and so it's a different relationship to the descendant families. But I was really moved by Uncle Murray's invitation request for us to invest emotionally in the story and the relationships and to be part of the maintenance of them and to tell the story through kaupapa like the exhibition and like this panel. So yeah, here I am and here we are.
Yeah, a kind of sentiment that seems to echo throughout discussions of Ventnor is that it becomes a sort of uber example of showcasing good relationship. It's a demonstration or a kind of powerful symbol for us to embody what it means to be like honorable tawiwi. Is that something you immediately felt in understanding the story, or something that's sort of grown through a relationship with the Ventnor as a narrative?
I can start on that briefly because I'm torn again in two different directions. It's kind of like how Te Tiriti or Waitangi functions. It is, on the one hand, a wonderful symbol, a wonderful story. We can learn from it. We can look at it from many different angles. We can be inspired by it. But there's also something that gets lost in the abstracting of the story away from where it actually takes place, the actual people involved and the actual relationships today. So I both want to say that the Ventnor story is a wonderful story for Chinese and Aotearoa to look to as to how we can continue to conduct ourselves. And even a story that, say, tauiwi of colour, tauiwi of the global majority, can look to as an alternative story of tauiwi Māori relationships. At the same time, I don't want to abstract the story too far away from where it actually took place, the whenua that it is actually on and what it is actually about. Because the problem with a good story is that as it gets told and retold over and over again, you can generalize, you can exaggerate, you can smooth over some of the uncomfortable bits, and something gets lost in the telling when it's someone who's heard it from someone else who's heard it from someone else, but hasn't actually been there. And something that Liu Shong said to us at Paruru, and as we were walking out to Arai Te Uru signal point to hear about the story and look at the site where the Ventnor went down, Liu Shong really wanted us young people to be there and experience the story and feel the beating wind that was so loud that we couldn't really hear her tell her story on the day, but luckily it was recorded and the recording picked up on that. So I do know now what you said, Liu Shong. But there's something about the physicality and the tangibleness of that story that we must remember. It's more than just a lovely idea or a lovely story. And Jiang's exhibition too, you know, actually smelling the kelp, and seeing the very physical process that they and Reva went on in order to make the kōrari paper, for example. This is a story, among other things, about bodies, and so we have to embody it.
Yeah, I think we can make frameworks to think about the Ventnor, but at the end of the day, the people who were collecting up these bones were like, these are our Tangata Tiriti. How should we look after them? It was just instinct. It was like, okay, these people were trying to, well, maybe they didn't necessarily know why there were all these bones, but we know when we see death that care is required. And so it was just instinct. And I think that's probably something we can always, I think that's the place where everyone can relate to the story. It's a story about grief and how we look after each other. And I think that's at the core of being Tangata Tiriti as well, is just being instinctual, listening, and being kind. I don't think we have to always have a framework to think about things that are just kind of common sense.
I can add to that briefly as well. What I see in that retelling of the story is acting based on who you are and who you are as a collective, and the tikanga that your group has, because it was both instinct, I think, in the Manawhenua tupuna, and also just the following of tikanga practiced over hundreds of years. And so that makes me think that to be Tangata Tiriti must also mean, for us as Hainamana or Tainihi, on my Pākehā side, for us as Pākehā, and, you know, on my Anglican side, for us as Anglicans, to look back at who we are and respond from the core of that in a way that meets with tikanga Māori and te tiriti and the way things are done here. Not trying to fabricate some sort of, we joked around and used the term like Tangata Tiriti Ubermensch, like some idealization of what it means to just be kōiwi in Aotearoa. Probably means, at least in part, to be yourself as part of the collectives that you come under and came to Aotearoa under.
I might open up the question slightly to something, Lincoln, that you were really interested in talking about during the pre-panel hui, which is like, in what way, and this feels like a perfect place because we're talking about being Tangata Tiriti isn't about trying to be perfect, but also in what ways do we think being Chinese Tangata Tiriti alters or changes or informs being Tangata Tiriti versus, I suppose, compared to our, it's always like dangerous to place yourself like in opposition or like against like a Pākehā context, but I guess in opposition or rather than if we were just other Tangata Tiriti.
Or nohotahi alongside other expressions.
Yeah. But yeah, how does being Chinese inform or shape your understanding of your Tangata Tiriti-dim?
Yeah, I think Colleen alluded to this earlier. We bring values, beliefs, worldviews, etc., to the table. And part of what I was exploring in my PhD thesis was, well, what are some of those values that we bring as Asian people, and how do they help us to think about that treaty relationship? And I've got a few examples that I'll share now. Growing up, I often heard people say, especially Asian people, you know, Te Tiriti has nothing to do with us. You know, it was signed over there in 1840. We arrived here in 1990, whatever, and the future is kind of all the way over there. And that kind of way of understanding time, I just found really mind-boggling, because that was not the way that my ancestors taught me to understand time. I was always taught to understand time as, the past, present, and future are always entangled. I think about our practices, for example, of Qingming coming up next month, which is Tomb Sweeping Day, or reverence of your ancestors, right? If you really believed the past was in the past, then why would we even have Qingming? Why would we even have Tomb Sweeping Day? Weren't your ancestors alive, lived their life, died, and kind of see you later? It's like, actually, as Chinese people, we understand that the past is always before us. It precedes this moment in time, but it also is always already in front of us. I think also about that notion of karma, for example, from Buddhism. If the past was really in the past, then why would we even bother to talk about karma? If what I did yesterday or 5 minutes ago has no bearing to what I'm doing now, why even bother to talk about it, right? So I think one way is these worldviews that we have. They shape the way that we start to see, okay, Te Tiriti can't just be understood as a thing that was signed in 1840 and has no bearing to us. Yes, it was signed in the past, but it still has a bearing on the present and in the future. I also think about, the really beautiful philosophies that we inherit from our ancestors. I think about things like the yin-yang philosophy. I think about the notion of pratitya samutpada in Buddhism, or the doctrine of dependent origination, that all things always come into being in and as relationship, just as the yin-yang symbolism shows to us. You've got the black side and the white side, but even when you break that in half, these two sides can't be seen as separate, because there's also the little white circle in the black side and the black circle in the white side. These things remind us that always things come into being in relationship, right? I'm a teacher only in part because of my students who teach me. I become a brother only through the gift of my sibling. Much to the dissatisfaction of my parents, I'm not currently a husband because someone hasn't taken the sage, advice of Beyonce and put a ring on it. But hopefully you get my point, right? That things don't exist outside of relationship. And so that sort of helps me to think about, well, my being here is always tied to something else. And for me, that something else is, it screams out at me when I look at the preamble of Te Tiriti, that those who signed Te Tiriti back in 1840 envisaged in a society where there were others coming, and those others were people like me and my ancestors. So again, that past and present entanglement, that past, present, future entanglement, that nothing exists in and of itself, that being here is always about a relationship, an orientation to tangata whenua, an identity that only exists in relationship to tangata tiriti, and vice versa, right? I think we tend to get caught in dominant Western ways of thinking that like to separate things and just keep things as distinct, nature, culture, mind, body, heaven, hell, where one side always is good and the other side is bad, but we forget about the relationship between them. And I think that's what Chinese philosophy brings to me, what Asian philosophy more broadly brings to me, is this understanding, thinking about things and understanding the world as always entangled. We're always connected to something or someone else that makes my being possible. And for me, that reminds me always that my orientation to the other is always one of ethical responsibility, that my being is only possible because of someone else, that draws me into a relationship, an orientation of being responsible for that person. I think about, in Cantonese, the first thing we often say when we see one another is, "Sek jofan mea," have you eaten yet? And to me, that's just such a beautiful way of greeting one another, because from the outset, it's that orientation of relationship. I care about you. I'm concerned about you. It doesn't matter, whether you've eaten or not, but it's that orientation.
But it sort of offers like the promise of manakitanga almost to some
That's
degree,
right. That's
It's
right.
an invitation potentially. Do you want to get some food? Do you need food,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And I sort of reminded of what my PhD supervisor, Te Hua Hoskins, always says to me, and I'm going to quote her. She said, the Western paradigm emphasizes law and policy, but our indigenous knowing tells us that good personal relationships are the key to the possibility of anything. And I think that is true too for us as Chinese and, broadly speaking, Asian people. It's always about that personal relationship. When we start a business relationship, for example, what do? We go and have a 5-course meal, get drunk off our face, learn about your business partner's pet hamster that they had when they were 3 or whatever, It's always about establishing that relationship, because it's from those personal relationships that everything else is possible.
Yeah, I'm quite struck by all the examples you've given, Lincoln, because in some ways I feel like those examples are kind of predicated on a really deep knowing of Chinese ancestral knowledge, which I feel like a lot of diaspora Chinese do not have. So in some ways, because they do not have that deep ancestral knowledge, there is a greater disconnect between them and the notion of how actually this relationship can be reciprocal. And I don't know the answer to that. It's just like a thought that occurs to me that I find stimulating as I hear you speak. But
Yeah, I
Ida, Etienne, do you have any other thoughts around this quite vast topic?
I think my experience of Chinese is more a diasporic experience, which is a lot more politically and socially charged, where you've got migrant parents who are trying to make a living and competing for resources. And then you see other groups who are prioritized rightfully for resources. And then they say, hang on, why do they get this? And that's where Māori and other tauiwi, migrant tauiwi, are pit against each other by a Crown institution. And that's manifested in really ugly lateral harm between our communities. And I've grown up seeing that. But then you realize that each of us aren't the problem. It's the lack of resources for all of us, and we're constantly. Nathan, you had I don't know what panel it was, but you said something about how being Chinese in Aotearoa is about being adjacent to Pākehā. What was the wording? I can't remember.
In proximity to whiteness?
Yeah, and proximity to whiteness. There you go. And that is always so true, because I think for a lot of Chinese people who come here, they follow the path of white success, and that's where they get their resources. And if you're a migrant and you've got kids and you got like a minimum wage job, you don't have the space to be thinking about what does it mean to be Tangata Tiriti. So I think as a child of a migrant, I have that space to think about it. And that's me. I think my positionality is that I am diasporic. I have a lack of access to the knowledge of my Chinese culture. My parents may have done some things that are not reflective of the values of Tangata Tiriti, but I can own that. And I think the role of being Tangata Tiriti, I think, is something you move into. I don't think a lot of people will naturally either be born out of the womb being like, woo, Tangata Tiriti, or come land at the airport and be like, Tangata Tiriti. It's something we realize, like, okay. And then we start to learn and unlearn a lot of the things that we've thought that being a migrant in Aotearoa means. Yeah.
A lot of unlearning as well. How about you, Etienne?
Yeah, I want to add to that, because unlearning is hard. Learning is also hard. But when the pool of stories that you have available to you about who you are or can be, or who your people are, or who your family is, when it is limited, you can't go anywhere. We need stories to take us where we need to go. We need someone to be able to imagine it, or we need to be able to draw on something that's happened in the past, but like the Ventnor story hasn't seen enough of the light of day until very recently. And I'm really grateful to be a still young person in the time where the Ventnor story is coming more and more in Chinese consciousness and in Māori consciousness and in wider societal consciousness. I would have loved to know about the Ventnor story back in high school, when I'm looking through the books for my history assignment and can only find things about Pākehā Māori relationships. one moment that changed it all for me, even before I heard about the Ventnor story, was when Matua Moana Jackson came to law school and gave an amazing talk on Māori Asian and especially Māori Chinese solidarities. And what struck me about the talk was not the the exhortations to what could be possible in the future or the ways we can get there. What got me was how he talked about examples where it had already happened. And so getting to that future suddenly became a lot more possible because it's already happened in some places. There are strands we can draw on and weave together as opposed to trying to create something out of nothing, which is hard. And the story that struck me the most was one about the Parihaka ploughman who had their land very unjustly taken from them by the colonial British settler troops and resisted peacefully, non-violently, and with manaakitanga and with love. And for that, they were taken off their land and taken down to Otipoti, Otako, Otago, and were forced to do manual labor around the same time that Chinese gold miners were in Otago as well. And they were being mistreated by the Pākehā miners, and sometimes acts of violence were done towards them. And so the moving bit for me is that Matua Moana says, the Parihaka ploughman saw what was happening to a community of Chinese miners who were being attacked by Pākehā miners. And so they did the same incredible, generous, protective act that they did at Parihaka. They surrounded the Chinese miners in a circle and put their bodies between them and their attackers. And so when I think about, what could Māori Chinese solidarity mean today? We're not starting from scratch. We have this Parihaka ploughman story. We have the Ventnor story, and those can provide us the blueprints or the keys or the principles or the values on how we might move forward together.
Thanks, Etienne. I'm kind of wanting to circle back to something you were saying, Ida, about that relationship with one's parents and I guess other people in the community, I think, who perhaps might not be on the same journey or might not be at the same place in the journey as Tangata Tiriti. How do you contend with that? How do you contend with peers, friends, people in your community who either disagree fundamentally or are apolitical or apathetic towards notions of Māori Chinese solidarity? I know that's such a big can of worms question, but answer as you are comfortable with.
It's a work in progress, and I don't know how far we'll get with it. But I think it's getting them into spaces to meet face to face, the people that they're talking about. Another beautiful thing, which Jiying alluded to, is I brought home some harakeke to strip, and they decided to join in, and it's the first thing they've ever done sitting down with me, and we didn't need to talk because I think the trouble is we don't have a common language that can express these complexities. All I know how to, my Cantonese is limited to domestic language, so it's really hard to express some of these things, and I think experience here can be our greatest teacher, bringing them along to, Māori kaupapa, getting them to feel that connection with the harakeke, things like that have done a lot more than me having an argument with them over the dinner table.
Thank you. Yeah, that really resonates. Etienne? Do you have anything you want to share in this regard? It doesn't have to be specifically around your family, but I don't know, any experiences with peers or people in the community that you've tried to pull along your journey, or yeah, I'm just curious.
Yeah. I feel like I'm just restating what I said, really. I'll just make another plug for Tell Them a Better Story, because, you know, things get complicated when you start talking about treaty principles and submissions and what Section X of the ABCY Act says about Z in date. What's after Z? Anyway, but when I tell someone about the Ventnor story, when I tell the Chinese uncle, for example, even if he's never considered, this is a completely hypothetical person. I don't know who I'm talking about here, but even if this person has never thought about Te Tiriti as something affecting them or their community, as we've talked about, people's eyes just kind of light up when you tell them the story about the Chinese bones on the ship that sank, and then the bones that were looked after by the people of that place. It's both the depoliticizing, in a sense, of, you know, not using the buzzwords and not necessarily having to default to anger and thinking the right thoughts and having buzzwords which have their place. And of course, anger and opposition also have their place. I just don't think their place is the one-on-one conversation between me and my uncle, because something in the depth of the Ventnor story or the Parihaka story will just speak to him in a way that going the direct route cannot. So I'm a big believer in the power of people hearing better stories and that being able to enlarge their world.
Thank you.
And yeah, I think I'm just going to sort of restate what I've already said. And that's, you know, in my experience, it's those, again, those values, beliefs that we have as, broadly speaking, Chinese, Asian, whatever. I find them really useful tools to get us to engage in thinking about Te Tiriti without necessarily talking about Te Tiriti itself. It's like, you know, all my life you've been telling me about this orientation of responsibility to other people. Well, how does that then apply to our relationship with tangata whenua and vice versa?
Checkmate.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And it's a language that our elders, peers, etc., understand. It's stuff we do every day. We don't even think about it. It's the taken for granted. I think I think dominant Western thinking again encourages us to have these checklists and clarity and, you know, how to be Tangata Tiriti 101, and you get all of these things you have to do. But actually, at the end of the day, I think it just goes back to relationships. And there's so much in our own repertoires around that I think is useful and can be a point of entry, if you like, into engaging in some of these conversations without having to go through the confrontational route in ways that, yeah, perhaps in my view anyway, more conducive than just shouting down one another's
like
throats.
a base understanding of humanism is
That's
actually
right.
fundamental to us all, but we
That's
kind
right.
of we get lost in the weeds sometimes. One last question before I throw to the audience for any audience questions, but I'm wondering how being in community with other tangata tiriti has shaped you as people. Anyone can go when they feel their heart sing.
I can start us off because
Thanks, Etienne.
I think if you'd asked me that question before Paruru, I would be thinking about the times that I've been in activist social justice spaces, and we've all been on a protest together and we're all railing against the evil government for the latest things that it's done. And, you know, we're all just tangata tiriti, holding us all together sort of thing. But that reaches a logical endpoint, and actually got a confession to make, which somehow slipped my mind in my introduction. I'm doing a PhD at Victoria, on what it means to be Tangata Tiriti with my wonderful supervisors, Mamre Stevens and Luke Fitzmaurice Brown. Lincoln's name drop is enough that I feel like I need to, sorry, Mamre and Luke, yeah. And when people talked about being Tangata Tiriti, well, when Tauiwi talked about it especially, it felt that there was a logical endpoint beyond which there was just kind of a, what I mean is a child asks you, why is the sky blue? And then you give an answer, and then they say, oh, and why is that? And you give another answer, and depending on how early you dropped out of science at school, and for me it was quite early, I reached the point of, I don't know, it just is, sort of quite quickly. And I feel like we get to that point quite quickly when we're talking about what it means to be Tangata Tiriti. We might use stand-in terms like, oh, it means non-Māori ally, or it means person who's here because of Te Tiriti is so, and then we reach the cogs turning. What do we say next there? So what I would say now, since going on Paruru, when you ask about hanging out in a collective with other tangata tiriti, I immediately think of what it means to just hang out with the Chinese community and how us being us, practicing our values, retelling our stories, stripping harakeke together, and that being, well, as political an act as if we all went on a protest. Not dunking on protests are great, but you know what I mean there? Like, for me, there is now no separation between being with the Chinese community or, I don't know, being with my Anglican whānau or being in disabled spaces together and being really true to that with an orientation towards te ao Māori, tikanga, te tiriti, but in being ourselves as a collective together and practicing our practices, that to me is being with other tangata tiriti.
One thing is that I think the best thing that tangata tiriti do for one another is we hold each other accountable. And we role model for one another, because I think, as I said in the beginning, it made such a huge impression on me when a Pākehā friend who also grew up on the North Shore could pronounce Māori names properly. And I knew how to do them, I just chose not to. And I think making that choice to pronounce words correctly was just, I don't know why it was so transformative, but it was. And when we see other tauiwi do it, we're like, why aren't we doing it? So holding each other accountable. And I also think as tangata tiriti, we have this, you can frame it however you like to, but I think there is a quite exciting opportunity to claim your past and make something beautiful and restorative out of that. And that's a really exciting project. We can think of it as we can either take the route of denial and rejection and defensiveness, or we can look at restorative, being restorative and honorable, and being okay to be vulnerable and learn from one another.
Thanks, Ina.
And just to build on that, I think just recognizing that there's different ways of engaging in this huge mahi that we're all on. Some of us are the people that like to be, engaged in that active antagonism, that kind of active opposition. But for others of us, that's not how we are in the world. And that it all matters. It all contributes to something. I think a lot of the time it's like you're either one of us if you do what we're doing, or you're not. And I think there's different ways of engaging in this work. And so that would be one way I think that I've been shaped by other tangata tiriti, thinking about the different ways that we're engaged in this work, and it all contributes to something.
That's really beautiful. Thank you. I feel like that's a really nice note to end on in terms of the me asking questions side, but I'm going to pass to Etienne to close us off. Thanks, everyone.
Nō reira, ko tātou tēnei. Kia ora, kia ora, kia ora tātou.